Okay, everybody, we're going to get started here in just a moment. Give me one moment here. Okay, give me one moment. Okay, finally, here we go. Hopefully, you're good here. We're recording. Make sure. Yes, all right. So, welcome to week 2. Sorry for the little bit of a delay there. I had to check something. We had the computer had some um, um, Wi-Fi issues here, some internet access issues. So anyway, I'm grateful that you're here, or at least, well, I'm the only one here. But I'm grateful if you're seeing this that you're actually watching the recording. So I'm very happy and very pleased. First of all, let me begin by saying that it's been a very good first week. The interaction was very good. Your uh, replies and responses to your fellow learners were positive, were uplifting, were encouraging. And that's really important. And I want to commend you for that because that's how you build a nice class culture. And one of the great things about this platform, if you will, this way of learning is the interaction that you have with fellow learners. There's, I'm just going to go quickly, it does relate to human development to some extent, and psychology certainly. The model that most traditionally we think of when we think of education is a classroom. Many years ago, we thought of a classroom as a bunch of students in rows and a teacher or a professor up at the front lecturing and bestowing the information to the students who would try and memorize it and then regurgitate it on some kind of a test or a paper or something along those lines. We've changed that in the classroom now, so there's more interaction, there's more learning from each other. The best educators are no longer solely the sage on the stage. So there are some times that lecture is important, and that, no question about that. But typically now we want to have more experiential learning. We want to have more interaction with students, depending on a lot of things. As an freshman students or adult students, or something in between. So especially with adult students, which in many cases the online students are adults, you can read the introductions. Many of you have families. Some are retired. Some have jobs and are active in the church and have spouses and other obligations and things such as that. So you bring with you a wonderful amount of information. So yeah, I'm gonna talk to you tonight about some things. You have what the experts know through your videos and your presentations, your PowerPoint slides, things such as that. But the point is this: the interaction that you have with each other that's where real learning happens in many cases, and my input as well. in my sort of guiding and facilitating the discussion and pointing things out and asking you to maybe review on one of your fellow learners' posts if I think it's applicable to something that you were talking about. So all the more reason to sort of build that culture. Online learning, when it started out, typically the idea was to disseminate information. That's just how it was set up. I don't know that that was consciously thought of, but to disseminate information to the people out there, because the internet has a lot of information. That's not necessarily real learning. Real learning takes place with our interaction, the relationships we build, the relationships that you have, even online, even though some of you don't ever see each other and may never see each other. Nevertheless, you can build that relationship up through messages and things like that. So I commend you for having great discussions this week in our introduction to human development. As I told you last week, you're going to get a chance to really look at human development throughout the lifespan. There was a time we looked at, this course would have been called child development, developmental psychology or child psychology, because typically that's what people thought. We developed our personality. We're developed by the time we're 20 or 22 years old, and maybe a little bit beyond that, some things might change. As you're going to see, we have a lot of theorists and things like that look at development throughout the lifespan. And Freud was the one, and again, he was the first one to look at these things. So people kind of beat him up and say part of the problem with this theory is he stops when people are still kids. Well, I mean, in all honesty, people have come along after him. Yeah, sure. Now you look at him and you can take what you like from his and use your own, and you can now expand it. But he had nothing from which to build. So Freud, he's out there a little bit. I won't deny that his ideas are in some ways extreme or whatever have you. But let's not beat him up too much. So as I said, you're going to get a chance to look at your development throughout your lifespan as it applies to yourself. This is one of the best courses that I've ever taught or been involved with in terms of applying the material directly to your situation. There are others that are very good, and if I really thought hard, I might find some that I think are just as good. But I don't think there's anything better, at the very least, at showing you the students the theory as it applies to your life. And we started out, as I said, from the very beginning, in some cases even before you were conceived, and what your parents were like, and they planned for a child, and they hoped for a child, and in some cases didn't happen. There were miscarriages before you came along. I've read in other classes, things like that. So even before you came along, and then when you came along, and God was good, and God's always good, and you came to full term, and when you were born, that's the very beginning, the sperm and the egg, little zygote there, so yeah, we all were that one at one time. We were just a little tiny little thing, and then we're going to go on all the way through, and we started it this coming week. So keep your notes in order. At the end, it's going to be like a big sort of project, if you will, that you'll be able to look at your life. And I know that in some cases, well, in all cases, we're still living, but in some cases, there are some students who are, 25, 30 years old, so they're not going to get to those middle age and later life. But you'll reflect, you'll project, you'll talk about your parents or your grandparents or people that or what you think it's going to be like for you. Are you planning for old age? Are you setting aside money for retirement? Are you buying land, which is a whole other thing beyond development, but just preparing for those things, doing the things now that are healthy, with the idea that you will reap those benefits mainly as you get older. Or are you throwing caution to the wind and eating unhealthy foods and things such as that? And because it's easy when you're 20 something to have ice cream and pizza as much as you want, and bacon at every meal and everything like that. Because you wake up the next day and you're fine, but as time goes on, you'll find that may not be the case. As one who is now looking at 60, myself, I'm 58. uh, recognizes, and I always did take pretty good care of myself. So I'm very fortunate there. So we're going to look at, right, for this week, for tonight, we're going to look at the social and emotional development. If I can get this slide to go. Okay. One of mine, I may have mentioned this last week. One of my, sorry, one of my, one of the topics, I guess I should say, that I really love, pardon the pun, I'm really attached to, is this attachment theory. We've learned a lot about it. There was a time that people were more rigid in their thinking about what secure attachment was, and what other things were not good along those lines. But nevertheless, it's still, frankly, a big deal. And attachment, and how to build good attachment, and those kind of things. And what does it look like when there is not a secure attachment? So what is attachment? Okay, so and you're going to see this. I'm just going to talk a little bit about it. Secure attachment, or what attachment in itself is, how the baby, an infant, up to about 2 years old, we can start to see it, and of course we see it throughout the life, our lives. But do they feel secure in their situation with their caregiver? Babies, very young babies can't talk, but you can see how they react if their main caregiver leaves the room. Do they throw a tantrum, or they cry a little bit and learn how to and then self-soothe, which is absolutely vital. And then when the caregiver returns, and you're going to see this more in detail, when the caregiver returns, are they excited and hanging on for a short period of time, or are they sort of soothed in a reasonable amount of time and then go on feeling secure to go on to playing with their blocks or their whatever it is that they're playing with? That would be like a secure attachment. If the caregiver leaves and the baby just goes on and on and on and just and will not be soothed, even others are not able to soothe them. This is a little bit of a concern, if you will. It's not a problem, but okay. So what's going on there? And everyone is born with their different temperament. So how do we then, sort of establish a little bit more secure attachment? No fault of a parent in many cases, but it's just a matter of, and how this is done, I won't get into right now, but assuring the baby that when the caregiver leaves, they will return. Assuring the baby, or the infant or the toddler, that if the caregiver does leave, they will be left in capable hands. Maybe not as comforting as the mom or the dad, but capable and comforting hands that will care for him or her, so that they can get their needs met. There's the studies that were very famous some years ago of the babies in different war zones in Europe who lost their parents to the war and were pretty much just housed and shelved in orphanages. And there were so many of them and so few caregivers. It's all that the caregivers could do to feed them and kind of change their diapers, when they could. There was little to no time to pick them up, to cuddle them, to coddle them, to massage them, to speak to them. And so the babies developed what was called at that time, I think it still is called, reactive attachment disorder. So you react, you don't have a good attachment, and it's a disorder because you are, and your brain would be wired such that the idea was that no one is to be trusted. No one is going to care for you. Everyone needs to care for themselves. And these babies, came and had a lot of times a hard time in school, hard time in society, because they would steal. They didn't have any remorse if they stole something, because the way their mind thought was, this is how we survive. There was a couple of documentaries that were very dramatic I don't want to paint that dramatic of a picture. Um, whatever we know about neurology now is going to change in 5 years from now. Whatever we knew 5 years ago is changed now. So there are some treatments and some things that we can do for like children and even adults who have issues with attachment. But that doesn't minimize the importance of it, and it doesn't minimize. I just encourage parents all the time because still there's something to be said about those first 2 years of life, 18 months even, that you spend time with them, you coddle them, you talk to them, you massage them. A lot of tactile contact is really, really important. So anyway, so go ahead a little bit here and see if I can get a slide move up. Yeah, I'm not going to go through all these slides, but I do definitely encourage you to go through the slides, read about attachment in your books, because you're going to hear about it from me, and it's on your quizzes and things such as that. So more importantly, how it impacts your life, your trustworthiness, your trustingness, and as you're an adult, you might start to look around and see some people. Don't start diagnosing people. That happens a lot. But seeing there are some people who are just a little bit more insecure, and it could be because of their experiences as a child. And one of the things, the example I gave of the kids in Europe is pretty extreme. But I think that in society today, to some extent, there's a possibility that we run a little bit of a risk of raising kids with not extreme attachment problems, but maybe not the most healthy and functional, if you will, simply because we're so busy, simply because most households have two people working. A lot of times, moms or dads, both go back to work within 3 months of having a child. That's not to say daycares are bad. That's not to say that daycares cannot help children. But there is something to be said about that. I'm not citing any studies or anything like that says there's a problem. I don't mean to paint doom and gloom, but it's interesting to see, or it will be interesting to see, 20 years from now, what it's like. The Bible says, and a lot of attachment, it relates to anxiety, of course, naturally. I mean, I don't think you need a degree in psychology to see how if you don't have a healthy attachment, that's going to increase your anxiety. And the Bible talks about, as time goes on, and the end times even. I'm not here preaching end times. I'm not here preaching at all. But the Bible does talk about men, their hearts, failing them, passing out from fear, if you will. And I think that you don't divorce. My beliefs are, you don't divorce Scripture from science. God is God is the God of the Scriptures. God is also the God of what we call science, if you will. He foretold of this. I'm not, again, don't not painting doom and gloom. I'm not saying the world's coming to an end or anything like that, but I'm just looking at what we now know that we didn't know 50 years ago about attachment. We didn't know that. Attachment really made, for the most part, in clinical settings, people were somewhat aware of it. But 50, 60 years ago, it wasn't nearly at the forefront of psychological thinking or clinical thinking or in society as it is now. And I think that we can do something about that. I did have a student a while back now, maybe a year or so ago, who had a concern. Oh my goodness! She told me what was going on. If there was a concern, I would make a recommendation, but no, there was no concern. So don't think that I'm suggesting that. But I do highly recommend to everyone, spend time with the babies, massage them, a lot of tactile contact, talk to them, like I said, hug them. But also the other thing, and we're going to get into this probably a little bit more next week, if we get into some parenting and things like that, we have to let kids learn how to self-soothe. I won't tip my hand too much, but a lot of times, parents these days also, for whatever reason, They want to run and rescue their child if their child skins their knee or is crying. And I'm not saying you should ignore your child by any stretch of the imagination. But if we solve all their problems for them, they don't learn how to solve problems themselves. So, letting a child cry a little bit and figure out, as long as he's not hurting, as long as he's not sitting there with his finger dangling or whatever have you, if he didn't get a toy and he gets upset, there's ways to handle that. We're going to get into that a little bit more in the next couple of weeks. So, there certainly is reason for hope, even if you feel like the attachment wasn't great. You can still do some things with it as kids get a little older. It's not the doom and gloom that was thought once just a short time ago. I'm not going to keep going any much longer. I'm the only one on here. I'm pretty sure still, otherwise I would have some interaction. But I just want to encourage you to go through the slides. I'm here if you need me by any stretch of the imagination. Do not hesitate to reach out to me in the message tab. That's the best way to get in touch with me, as some of you have done. And we'll go forward in week 2. It's been a great first week. You guys are doing super. Looking forward to reading. I've only glanced at a little bit of some of your apply papers, and of course your discussions. I think I've interacted with just about everybody there. I'll go back and check again if I miss anybody. But I'm looking forward to reading your apply papers for sure, and going forward and getting into some of the other things in week 2. So this week I will say last week was not a scripture. So this week we're going to go with Genesis 1:1. Genesis 1:1 in the beginning. We're not quite at the beginning, but Genesis 1:1 in the beginning. So with that, I'm going to get out of here and let you guys get back to your lives and back to work in the course room maybe. And I will see you in the course room.